we have the hummingbird. This result is the only bird build with full 360-degree movement similar to a dragonfly. This combined with its extremely small size enables the hummingbird to very quickly change direction mid-flight, allowing it to easily dodge attacks and fly around obstacles. More importantly, it allows the hummingbird to act as nectar, which is an extremely valuable source of energy that's normally inaccessible to birds since birds are usually too heavy to land on flowers and not agile enough to access nectar mid-flight. This all sounds great, but the hummingbird also has two very serious weaknesses. The first is pretty obvious: they have no combat prowess at all, and any of attack they fail to dodge will send them right back to the character select screen. Peacock build is another generally understated build, does however have one of the highest intimidation proficiency bonuses in the game, gaining a massive buff to all intimidation checks when its eyespot feather ability is activated. As impressive as this ability is, the peacock's actual attacks do very little damage, so any player able to resist being frightened will have a pretty easy when the peacock's diamatic display also blocks vision behind itself, making a scalp approached by a third-party attacker extremely easy. And while they can escape by flying, the feathers of a peacock are so heavy that getting airborne takes a bit longer than most birds, which can be the difference between dodging or dying when under attack. Go is a bit of an AFK class. Very minimal skill is actually required to pilot this spell. They opted to back into the filter feeding ability, meaning all they really need to do to gain experience and progress their character is pick a random spot in the lake bed and start digging around with their beak, scoring free wins against things like snails and shrimp. However, when faced with a challenge from any player anywhere near its size, this build totally falls apart. They rely on water to impede the approach of predators in order to give them time to escape when attacked. However, this doesn't always work. Their pathetic defensive stats mean they go down in 1 or 2 hits, and their slow flight startup means that oftentimes players will have time to rush them down even when they're in the water. This is an easy build to rack up a bunch of experience with, but also a very easy build to defeat if you know their weaknesses are the humble chicken, often compared to the T-Rex, to exemplify how far the dinosaur faction has fallen. While I disagree with the implication, I don't disagree that chickens are indeed a low-tier build. While they aren't anywhere near as totally helpless as a QB or kakapo, there are still a fairly average static bird that lacks the ability to fly for any extended distance. They can certainly hold their own against most similarly sized opponents, but with poor escape options and no unique abilities, this build faces an uphill battle against most opponents. Well, okay, I shouldn't say no unique abilities, but to be honest, their fast response rate kind of backfired on them due to humans using the factory farming strategy. Next in seats here we have the vulture build, the tank-used variant of the raptor subclass. A good tank build needs to be able to accomplish two things. The first is area denial, which vultures do quite well. A few of them can easily lock down a carcass, one of the most contested points of interest you'll ever see on the map. They can do this because of their large size and acidic projectile attempt. The other thing, a tank must be good at shrugging off hits, and this is where vultures fall short. Thick feathers usually shield them completely from smaller attack, but because of their hollow bones, blunt force can easily crush their defensive and take them down, and only a hit or two. So while they can defend a carcass from ports of smaller scavenge, they don't have much counterplay towards bigger, more aggressive rollers. Out of their evolution points, optimizing and perfecting the pack attack both in power and efficiency, with one goal in mind: to be able to hit insect players through cover. Burrowing is one of the safest, most effective ways insect players can avoid combat, but the woodpecker absolutely demolishes this strategy. One of the main advantages of this strategy is that having a powerful beak that is highly effective at drilling through wood also just means you've got a super sharp beak that is highly effective as a general-purpose weapon. One of the main disadvantages of this strategy is that pecking it would give the woodpecker's location away, alerting more powerful predators to its presence while it's in the middle packing and is distracted. One particular woodpecker build, the two, can opted to spec into more bulk and an even more powerful beak, which while less useful for attacking insects through the wood is still extremely powerful for PvP. All in all, interesting strategy, by no means flawless, but definitely has some solid strength. What I've been pretty hard on flightless birds up until now, so you might be surprised to see me rate penguins as upper mid-tier rather than low-tier. Difference is penguins actually swapped out their wings for an arguably equally viable alternative, flippers, which essentially allow them to fly through the water with incredible agility. This gives them a downright broken matchup against fish. However, this strategy is pretty much only viable on servers where there are no land-based predators that penguins would still need to worry about. So if for whatever reason a few polar bears ever spawn in the Antarctic server, it's kind of game over for that entire build of predators they have to contend with in the water are even more dangerous, and while their agility does help them dodge attacks, ultimately it's still a totally one-sided matchup. Their strategy is pretty cool and actually fairly dominant due to limited competition, but I wouldn't be surprised to see the entire penguin player base collapse if the devs ever add new DLC in the form of an Antarctic land predator, or even if they just buff the land mobility of the leopard. Its abysmal powers that leads it to rely heavily on intimidation to secure territory. This can be unbelievably effective at times, and it's not uncommon to see top-tier predators play an encounter that they easily could have won. Still, the obvious flaw in this strategy is that if the goose's opponent resistance frightened, the goose will be wide open to a punishing counterattack. In addition, the goose's weak spot is easily exploitable by intelligent players, so careless aggression tends to be the goose's biggest strength and biggest weakness at the same time. Put a huge amount of evolution points into maxing out the puncture damage it can deal with its beak, and it did so to great success. Parents have one of the highest damage packs of amber and freak. The one hit their targets, even those with scale armor like large fish and juvenile crocodiles. The effectiveness of their piercing attack is amplified by their long neck, which gives their attacks a deceptively long range, giving their strikes an almost cobra-like flash to them. They have downright oppressive matchups against fish amphibians and all other smaller erotic builds. One vulnerability they do have is that their flight ability has a lot of startup, making it a bit less reliable as an escape option if they do happen to get ambushed. Still, it's certainly not terrible. Another weakness is that their long neck presents a bit of a weak point, making lunging forward with repeated packing attacks a bit risky. If you get too predictable about it, good players will be able to punish careless lunges quite hard. Eat here, we have the pigeon particular. The pigeon is sorely lacking in any combat-focused stat like power or defense. They do best in cities, where their excellent navigation ability grants them an extra bit of safety by nesting among high rises in loot-rich locations, but even in cities, pigeon players tend to be the main source of XP for higher-tier HP Redditors. Plus, if you're just looking to play a bird build that is good at looting cities, there are better options available anyway.